At the most extravagant wedding of the year, as the orchestra swelled and every guest held their breath in anticipation, a black waitress stepped into the center aisle. Her hand was steady, her eyes unwavering. In a sudden motion that no one expected, she grabbed the groom's hand and pulled him back. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Phones were raised, cameras flashed, and security rushed forward, their polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. Whispers surged through the cathedral, a low hum of disbelief. Everyone assumed she was a staff member who had overstepped her place, but the tension in the air hinted at something far darker. The bride's perfect world was about to crack, and the woman standing there held the key to exposing it. Hours earlier, Naomi Carter had tied her apron in the staff corridor, adjusting the straps as her mind raced with every detail of the wedding. Her shoes pinched painfully, her hands smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the cracked screen of her phone displayed a picture that anchored her heart. Lily, her daughter, smiling and holding a paper sun she had drawn. Naomi whispered under her breath, "Be good for Grandma," and tucked the phone into her pocket. Today was not a day for fear. Today was a day for action. She had learned to move unseen, to navigate a world that didn't notice her, but invisibility was about to become her most powerful weapon. Moving through the corridors, Naomi's eyes scanned every guest, every security guard, every server. She cataloged every face, noting who looked distracted, who moved predictably, and who could be persuaded if necessary. This wedding was unlike any she had served before. The stakes were monumental, and the man at its center, Raphael Anderson, was more than a billionaire. He was the man whose foundation had saved her daughter's life. Without him, Lily might not be alive today. The thought weighed heavily on Naomi, pressing urgency into every step she took. She wasn't just a server today. She was a protector, an invisible hand guarding a fragile future. In the private lounge, a framed photograph caught Naomi's attention. Raphael, poised and calm, one hand on the shoulder of a small child in a hospital gown, smiled softly. Beneath the frame, the plaque read, "Flame of Hope Foundation, saving lives since 2011. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She could remember the sterile hospital room, the monitors beeping as her daughter's condition stabilized only at the last possible moment. The foundation had been the only thing keeping Lily alive. And now, that same man, who had saved her daughter, was about to be married to someone whose intentions were already clouded in secrecy and deceit. Clara Beaumont moved through the crowd like royalty, her smile precise, her laughter practiced, her eyes cold and calculating. Marcus Hale, her silent shadow, followed every step she took. Naomi approached with a tray of champagne, careful to maintain her role, but Clara's gaze swept over her with the chill of an evaluation. "Be careful," Clara said, her voice smooth yet sharp. "That bottle costs more than your rent." Naomi said nothing, keeping her composure, but inside, her mind was alight. Clara wasn't merely cruel. She was strategic, dangerous, and entirely unaware that her plan was about to be challenged by someone she had assumed invisible. Later, Naomi retrieved linens from a quiet side corridor when she heard voices behind a slightly ajar door. She froze. Clara's voice. Marcus's laughter. "Once the marriage is official," Clara said, "I'll redirect the funds through our nonprofit shell." Marcus added, "We dissolve the audit board first. Clean. Legal." Naomi's heart pounded. They were laughing about dismantling the foundation, about exploiting lives like currency, and she was the only one who knew. Her hands moved on instinct. She pulled out her phone and pressed record. 27 seconds captured every word, every plan, every betrayal. These seconds could change everything. Naomi tried to act cautiously. She left notes, tried calling the foundation anonymously, emailed summaries with no identifying information. Every attempt was blocked. Security intercepted her notes. Clara intercepted her messages. Within hours, Naomi was fired, escorted from the estate, erased from the wedding. Denise whispered behind her, "You don't go against people like that and survive." Naomi went home that night, held Lily close, and replayed the recording again and again. She understood that staying invisible now meant complicity. The world might not listen, but she could not be silent. By morning, Naomi had made her decision. She borrowed a dress, hid the phone in her pocket, and memorized the path to the aisle, rehearsing every moment in her mind. The vows were about to begin. Security lined the doors, guests smiled, cameras clicked, and Raphael stood at the altar, ready to commit to a life built on lies he did not yet know. Naomi's pulse hammered in her chest, her fingers gripping the phone tightly, her mind tracing every obstacle, every possible interruption. Invisibility had become her weapon. Courage had become her mission. And now, she would step forward into history. Part 2. The System Pushes Back. Naomi woke to the muted hum of the city outside her apartment, the memory of Clara's laughter still echoing in her ears. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Lily sleeping peacefully, a fragile reminder of why she had to act. Every plan she had made the night before suddenly felt insufficient. Calling the foundation, leaving anonymous messages, sending notes, all had failed. Each attempt had been intercepted, blocked, erased. It wasn't incompetence. It was a system designed to protect power, to filter out voices like hers. And if she didn't find another way, Clara would succeed. Lives would be quietly destroyed, just as the system intended. Determined, Naomi returned to the cathedral estate under the guise of delivering missing linens. She navigated the familiar corridors like a ghost, careful to avoid security cameras and patrols. She paused outside the main office, considering the best way to leave Raphael a warning. Her fingers itched over her phone, her instincts screaming at her to act, but she knew every movement could be observed. She slid a folded note under a folder when no one was looking, heart pounding with the hope that Raphael might read it before it was intercepted. Minutes later, a familiar assistant emerged, holding the very note she had just slipped inside. Clara's shadow was everywhere. Naomi realized the magnitude of the fight she had chosen. The enemy didn't need to confront her. They controlled everything. By afternoon, Clara herself appeared, calm, almost friendly, but with the piercing sharpness of someone who enjoyed control. "You think you can change how this ends?" Clara asked, her eyes glittering. "People like you disappear before anyone even notices." Marcus leaned back in the shadows, watching with a predator's patience. Naomi swallowed hard. Clara and Marcus weren't afraid of her. They were confident the world would never hear her voice. For the first time, Naomi understood that winning this battle wouldn't be about courage alone. It would require cunning, planning, and an unflinching willingness to risk everything. Within hours, Naomi was fired. No explanation, no warning, just a clipped signature and a guard leading her out. Denise tried to intervene, whispering a warning about the dangers of standing up against such people. Naomi ignored it. Outside, the air was crisp, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest. She thought of Lily, of all the children and families who relied on the foundation she barely understood but whose absence she could already feel. If Clara succeeded, it wouldn't make headlines. It would quietly steal hope. Naomi clenched her fists. She could not be silent. She would not allow fear to dictate action. Back at home, Naomi studied the recording over and over. Each playthrough revealed details she had missed in the adrenaline of the previous night. The tone of Clara's voice when she laughed at the audit board, the way Marcus emphasized the phrase clean, legal. Each second reinforced the urgency. This was no petty theft. It was a calculated dismantling of a lifeline. Naomi realized she couldn't rely on official channels or outside help. She had to act herself, directly, publicly, and decisively. Naomi spent the evening planning every angle. She borrowed a dress that would allow her to blend in, practiced walking with confidence down the aisle without being stopped, and memorized the ceremony schedule, security placements, and the path to the altar. She rehearsed her speech in whispers, imagining every possible interruption, every challenge, every skeptic in the audience. She considered timing, leverage, and the emotional weight of revealing the truth in front of hundreds of witnesses. Every misstep could cost her everything, but inaction was worse. She would not let her daughter's life and the lives of countless others be a casualty of silence. Morning arrived with a tense clarity. The cathedral shimmered with grandeur as guests began to take their seats. Cameras clicked, conversations buzzed, and security scanned everyone entering. Naomi moved through the crowd, invisible yet purposeful, a ghost with a mission. Her pulse raced. Every step brought her closer to the altar, and every step reminded her of the risk. She could be stopped at any moment. She could be thrown out, arrested, humiliated. But she kept moving. Every moment without action was another moment Clara could use to solidify her plan. When Raphael raised his eyes to speak, Naomi was close. She stood at the back of the aisle, preparing to step into the line of fire. The vows were about to begin, the world expecting a celebration. And yet Naomi knew the moment for action was perfect. She adjusted her grip on the phone containing Clara and Marcus's confession, heart hammering. Around her, the orchestra swelled, the air thick with expectation. But in Naomi's mind, everything narrowed to a single truth. The lie had to be exposed, and she was the only one who could do it. Courage, planning, and timing had led her here. Now she would act. Naomi stepped into the aisle with purpose, not panic. The organ softened. Raphael looked up mid-breath. For a beat, the cathedral read her as an errant server. Then she reached him, took his hand, and pulled him one step back. "Stop," she said, voice steady though shaking inside. "Before you say I do, you need to hear this." Security moved like a single organism toward her, but a murmur rose among the guests. Confusion first, then curiosity. Naomi pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room, clipped and clinical. "We dissolve the audit board. We redirect the funds through a shell. Clean. Legal." Marcus laughed on the recording as if it were a joke. Silence followed the playback at first, then a ripple of audible shock. Raphael's jaw tightened. The color left his face. Clara tried to intercept with practiced calm. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled temp looking for attention," she snapped, stepping forward as if to reclaim authority. Marcus moved faster, hand out to seize the phone. "Give it to me," he barked, but a guest, an off-duty lawyer with nothing to lose, stepped between them and shoved his own phone into a live stream. "Hold on, everyone," the lawyer said into his camera. "We're recording." With that single human action, the cathedral became public, and the recording had witnesses beyond the room. Cameras on phones multiplied like witnesses. The clip jumped to social feeds in real time. Clara's rebuttal frayed under the weight of evidence that now existed in many hands at once. The officiant backed away, uncertain whether to proceed. Security hesitated, pulled between protocol and the building outrage. People stood, phones raised, talking fast, some in disbelief, others in anger. "Call the police," someone shouted. "Don't touch her," another voice cut through. Raphael looked at Naomi as if seeing her for the first time. No longer an anonymous server, but the person who had yanked open a locked door. "Is this true?" he asked, small and precise. Naomi's throat closed. She told him about Lily, the hospital, the grant, the nights of worry, and the single call that had changed everything. Her words were short, factual, the way a person explains a wound. Raphael's expression shifted through phases: shock, betrayal, confusion, then a raw, human grief that made his shoulders slump. He asked for the recording. Naomi handed it over without hesitation. He listened, the same clip, now foreign to him in his own event. Tears, unannounced, gathered in the corner of his eyes. Clara's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with calculation. Damage control protocols flickered through her like a slideshow. Marcus tried to rally supporters, using charm and denial as weapons. That's when security finally moved, not to silence Naomi, but to separate combatants. Clara and Marcus were pulled aside, restrained while people argued for and against the interruption. The cathedral smelled of perfume and adrenaline. Live feeds accelerated the timeline. Within minutes, journalists at the doors smelled a story that wasn't a staged PR moment. Phone footage spread to regional feeds. Newsrooms began calling. Naomi stood in the worst kind of spotlight, exposed, vulnerable, and suddenly anchored by the fact that her evidence existed beyond the hands of the powerful. People in the crowd who had once scrolled past charity posts now scrolled with intent. Donors texted, board members received frantic calls. The foundation's public inbox lit up. Raphael moved from shock toward action with a speed that surprised everyone. He asked to speak privately with his legal head via his aide, and fingers flew across screens. The initial instinct for damage control had turned into an instinct for verification. Clara didn't go quietly. She screamed that Naomi had fabricated the file, that it was a setup, that she had been slandered. Marcus echoed the narrative while their PR flacks tried to intercept phones, insist on private statements, and spin. But spin dies when paper and timestamps and witnesses exist. The off-duty lawyer who jumped into the fray handed a copy of his recording to a young journalist already streaming live. The journalist's caption ran, "Bride accused of embezzlement at allegedly lavish wedding. Live now." The cathedral's echo carried the word embezzlement like a tolling bell. The narrative had snapped open, and people tuned in with outrage and curiosity. Security escorted Clara and Marcus out under a cloud of accusations. Police were on their way after guests insisted. Raphael moved through the crowd, collecting testimonies, asking for names, wanting to know the depth of what had been said. He sat Naomi down in a quiet side room, a simple act that felt monumental, and listened to her tell the story of Lily with unvarnished honesty. He did not speak in corporate platitudes. He asked specific questions about dates, about the recording's file metadata, about who else might know. Naomi answered with a clarity that made verification possible. In that small room, two strangers found a human alignment, one who had given hope and one whose hope had been given and preserved. Outside, the media frenzy began to organize into a coherent narrative. Clips cut together, timelines formed, and within hours, the story had legs. A billionaire's wedding interrupted by a server exposing an alleged plot to strip a foundation. Donors began calling the foundation. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Legal teams mobilized. The cathedral emptied with a strange hush. Some guests left in disgust. Others stayed to watch the fallout. Naomi's phone buzzed with messages from strangers. Offers of legal help, calls to action, invites to speak. But among the influx, there were also threats, anonymous voices that tried to intimidate her back into silence. The polarity of human response arrived in full force. As police took witness statements and secured the couple for questioning, Raphael made a public decision. The foundation would be audited immediately, and he would not finalize anything until truth was verified. He asked Naomi if she would sit with him for the first meeting of an emergency oversight committee. She agreed, feeling the full weight of the moment, the relief of being heard, the fear of retaliation, and a strange, quiet vindication. The cathedral's marble floors still gleamed, but the day had shifted from ceremony to reckoning. Naomi had stepped into a world that had never wanted her voice, and her voice had flipped power script, for now. The fight was far from over, but the pivot had happened. The rest of the story would follow with investigators, lawyers, and the slow grind of accountability. The morning after the wedding, the world felt smaller and louder all at once. Naomi awoke to a flood of notifications on her phone, emails, and text messages, some supportive, some threatening, all demanding attention. News outlets had picked up the viral footage. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire wedding interrupted. Server exposes alleged fraud." Naomi stared at the screen, exhausted but unrelenting. She replayed the recording again, not out of doubt, but to ensure she remembered every detail perfectly. Every laugh, every word from Clara and Marcus was a tool she would need. The city outside her apartment hummed obliviously, but inside, a storm was building that could not be ignored. At the foundation headquarters, Raphael called an emergency meeting. Board members arrived within the hour, their suits sharp but their eyes wary. Naomi was invited to sit in a small chair in the corner, still a stranger in this world of power and wealth. Raphael addressed the room. "We have evidence of serious misconduct. I want every account, every transaction audited immediately. No exceptions. Transparency is our only defense. Naomi listened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. She realized that courage alone had not ended the threat. Now it was precision, persistence, and public verification that would determine the outcome. Meanwhile, Clara and Marcus were under formal investigation. Clara's public statements were carefully phrased, attempting to deflect, deny, and spin. Marcus stayed mostly silent, but legal counsel worked furiously to protect them from immediate consequences. Naomi's phone buzzed constantly. Journalists wanted statements, board members wanted timelines, and lawyers requested her presence. She was exhausted, but she knew that inaction now would undo all she had risked. Every moment she engaged was another safeguard for the foundation, another shield for those whose lives depended on Raphael's vision. The media storm was relentless. Live feeds replayed the confrontation at least a dozen times, breaking down the recording, analyzing reactions, and speculating about motives. Some commentators tried to question Naomi's credibility, but the clarity of her evidence made that nearly impossible. One journalist even interviewed Lily, who shyly described how the foundation had saved her life. The footage of a small child with a paper son created a wave of empathy that no PR team could spin away. Naomi realized then that the story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every invisible person she represented, every voice silenced by power and indifference. At the foundation, Raphael met with auditors and legal teams. Naomi sat beside him, her hands folded, watching calculations, spreadsheets, and records being scrutinized. She asked questions, clarified details, and even challenged assumptions. Each contribution reminded her that being visible meant responsibility, not glory. Raphael noticed. He leaned toward her during a pause and said softly, "You understand this world in ways I never taught. You've seen what matters when no one else looks." Naomi felt a rare warmth, validation that her struggle had not only mattered, but had prepared her to influence change on a scale she had never imagined. Outside the foundation, social media reactions continued to spiral. Supporters rallied under hashtags calling for justice and transparency. Critics tried to tarnish Naomi's reputation, painting her as a meddler, but their voices were drowned out by the sheer evidence and widespread empathy. Naomi scrolled through the feeds and realized that visibility was a weapon in itself. People were listening now. People cared. Every like, share, and comment became a small reinforcement that her courage had not been in vain. She could see the reach of her actions in real time, proof that even the invisible could disrupt the powerful. Clara and Marcus, facing mounting legal pressure, attempted a last-ditch settlement, but Raphael refused. He wanted accountability, not quiet restitution. Naomi sat in the boardroom as lawyers negotiated, her mind alert to every detail, every clause. The small victories, correcting a misfiled account, ensuring a whistleblower's confidentiality, added up. Each one was a microcosm of justice. Naomi realized that heroism wasn't just bold gestures at the altar. It was the patient, relentless pursuit of truth afterward, even when no one applauded. Weeks passed, and the foundation began to stabilize. Raphael introduced Naomi formally at a press conference, describing her as the person who refused to look away. Cameras clicked, microphones lifted, and Naomi, usually invisible, stood center stage. She spoke carefully, recounting her experience with clarity, compassion, and a quiet authority that surprised even her. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she said. "It's acting when failure is possible and the stakes are everything." Behind her, Lily waved a small paper sun, the same drawing that had inspired her mother's actions. The message was clear. The invisible now had a voice, and that voice would not be silenced. Part 5. New Beginnings and Uplifted Voices. The city buzzed with the aftermath of the scandal, but inside the flame of Hope Foundation, there was a sense of calm purpose. Naomi walked through the halls, still unfamiliar, yet no longer invisible. She passed rooms filled with staff, volunteers, and donors, all working toward a mission that had once been threatened. Each face seemed to acknowledge her silently, the woman who had forced the world to pay attention. Naomi smiled faintly, remembering the fear and doubt she had carried before the confrontation. Now, courage had transformed into influence, and influence into responsibility. Raphael called Naomi into his office, the morning sun streaming through tall windows, illuminating shelves stacked with folders and awards. "Naomi," he said, "I've seen countless people serve this foundation, but none with the courage you've shown. I want you to help us launch a new initiative, Voices from the Shadows. It's designed to protect the workers, the caretakers, the ones who go unnoticed but make everything possible." Naomi's chest tightened. Recognition felt strange, almost unreal. She had acted out of necessity, not for fame or reward. And yet, here she was, being asked to lead a program that amplified the voices she had once been too afraid to claim for herself. The first meeting of the initiative was held in a modest conference room, filled with staff and volunteers. Naomi took a deep breath before standing at the podium. Her hands were steady, her voice clear. She spoke about courage, visibility, and the power of action when one refuses to be silent. She shared her story, not for glory, but as a lesson. Faces in the room softened, some nodding, some wiping tears discreetly. The weight of her experience transformed into guidance for others. And in that moment, Naomi realized she had moved from invisible to indispensable, from observer to catalyst. 1 month after the wedding, a community event marked the official launch of Voices from the Shadows. Naomi walked among guests, speaking to families who had been beneficiaries, listening to their stories of struggle and triumph. Children waved drawings and thanked her for making their voices heard, their innocence a reminder of why she had acted. Raphael stood nearby, watching her, his expression unreadable at first but softening with admiration. He understood that the foundation's impact extended beyond funds and charity. It depended on real people willing to act when no one else would. Meanwhile, Clara and Marcus faced legal proceedings. Court dates, public hearings, and press coverage dominated their schedules. The foundation's transparency and public support ensured that justice moved forward. Naomi followed the updates quietly, understanding that accountability was a process, not a single event. The relief of seeing the system work in favor of truth reinforced her belief. Courage alone isn't enough. It must be paired with vigilance, consistency, and resilience. At home, Naomi held Lily in her lap, the child's small hands tracing the sun she had drawn months ago. "Mom, you're like a superhero," Lily said softly. Naomi laughed a rare, full laugh and hugged her tightly. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about refusing to look away, about making the world better for the ones who had no choice but to depend on others. She looked at Lily, realizing that her actions had permanently changed the trajectory of not only her daughter's life, but the lives of countless others who remained unseen. The initiative gained traction rapidly. Naomi led workshops, coordinated outreach, and became the visible face of the program. Volunteers came forward inspired by her story, and people who had once been afraid to speak out found courage in her example. Naomi's visibility brought accountability, empathy, and inspiration. Her presence reminded everyone that even the smallest voice, when amplified at the right moment, could reshape systems built to ignore them. Every email she answered, every speech she delivered, was a ripple expanding outward, touching lives she might never see. One evening, Raphael and Naomi stood together overlooking the city from the foundation's rooftop. The skyline glimmered like stars caught in concrete. He turned to her and said quietly, "You reminded me why this foundation exists, not just to save lives, but to honor them. Your courage has changed more than you know." Naomi felt a quiet pride, not in recognition, but in purpose. She had acted when the world demanded obedience. She had refused invisibility. And now, she had the power to ensure that the next time someone needed a voice, it would be heard. As Naomi returned to the office, Lily's drawing of the paper sun sat pinned to her desk. Naomi smiled and whispered to herself, "We did it, Lily. We didn't look away." The world outside remained complicated and unfair, but inside the walls of the Flame of Hope Foundation, justice, courage, and hope had found a permanent home. Naomi had started as invisible. She had acted when it mattered most, and she had risen as a symbol that even the smallest voices could create the largest changes. The story closed not with an end, but with an opening, a new beginning for all the ones who would no longer remain unseen.